So good morning, everybody, again, and welcome to this second day of the summer course, Strengthening European Identity Through Culture and Education, and how to manage it. We have a very intense day with two main speakers who are going to talk about the power of culture and the memory strengthening European values. This is the general topic for the season today, and it will start with Dimitar Nikolovski. He is a research fellow at the Iask and PhD student at the Institute Philosophy and Sociology of the Polish Academy of Science in Warsaw. He has a PhD candidate. He is a PhD candidate at the Graduate School of Social Research, Polish Academy of Science in Warsaw, where he researched the relations between populist party and civil society in Southeast Europe. He has a background on political science and has studied law at the law faculty in Skopje and at the Central European University in Budapest and the universities of Sarajevo and Bologna. Currently, he's looking at civil activism in Central and Eastern Europe and how it relates to some of the most burning questions today, such European integration, challenge and leading of democracy, migration, and in addition, he is doing research on left-wing populism in other parts of Europe. This is a very specific topic, very different from which we have been talking until yesterday, but of course in very strong relation, and also it's a very hot topic today, so I think it's going to be a very interesting season. So Dimitar, thank you very much for coming here. It's your first time in Yuste. Hope you like it and hope you will enjoy it. And of course, I wish you a lot of success in the presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Miguel, very much. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for all of the organizers who invited us to be part of this summer course. As Miguel mentioned, mine and Isabella's presentations will be a bit different from what was discussed yesterday, and we come from a different educational background, I guess, or at least the research interests as the people from yesterday. And we discussed European identity yesterday, at several points during the discussions. But I don't think we talked about values. And this is what I would like to concentrate on today, through looking at some of the biggest conflicts within the European Union that we have today. So I know that everybody is a bit sleepy, so maybe instead of an energizer, I'm going to just ask a question, and maybe I can get a few answers from the audience. The question is, what are European values for you, or how do you understand European values? Anyone? Yeah, please.
Human rights.
Okay, human rights. Anyone else? Sorry? Solidarity. Solidarity, okay.
European values.
Respect.
Respect, okay.
Freedom.
Freedom.
Diversity.
Sorry?
Diversity.
Diversity, and we had freedom of speech.
Democracy.
Okay, so freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Democracy.
Democracy.
There is another one here.
Tolerance in general, and also social democracy in the economy.
Social democracy. And ecology, you said, right?
In the ecology too, but at the economy, the model, the European model, is social democracy.
Okay, okay. Okay. That's it? Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, more or less, I think we are on the same track. So I was looking at what are European values, and they're basically contained in the Treaty of Lisbon. You know, that are respect for human dignity and human rights, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. And it is included that these values unite all of the member states. No country that does not recognize these values can belong to the European Union. And if we were looking at the news from the last couple of weeks, we could see that in European Parliament there were serious discussions aimed at specifically at the country where I'm coming from at the moment, not where I'm from, Hungary, and about the state of democracy in Hungary and the proposals to invoke Article 7, that is to take away some of the rights that this country has as a member state, which is not going to happen. But anyways, the discussion was important. And we can see that also in a broader perspective, these European values are in fact Western or universal values. You rightly pointed over there that it's social democratic economy. So we do share values with the US, but European values are in fact more social than, because some Americans are more suspicious of the state, of trade unions, taxation, equality. But for the Berlin Declaration mentions solidarity as a principle. So having this in mind, we go back and I will share with you 3 anecdotes, again from the country where I'm coming from Hungary. The first 2 are contained in an article I read by Hungarian famous intellectual Gaspar Tamás Miklós. First one. Few weeks ago, this happened a few months ago, but anyways, in a small town in Hungary, 2 Catholic nuns were stopped on the street and berated by people yelling, "Migrants, migrants." So after pushing the old ladies a bit, they called the police, believing that they had seen Muslim women in a burqa and hijab. The police saved the nuns from the Christian crowd. Second anecdote. A few days earlier, in another small town, a local woman left the hairdressers. It was raining, so she did not want to ruin, the perfect new hairdo, so she covered her head in a shawl. And within a few minutes, small crowd gathered and again started crying, "Migrant, migrant." They began shoving this woman against the wall. So she said, "But I'm Hungarian. I don't speak any other language in Hungarian," saying this in Hungarian, "and I have always lived here." Some passers-by recognized her, called the police, they rescued her, but unfortunately, the hairdo was destroyed. The third example is in the realms of hyperrealism. An Egyptian soap opera was filming in Budapest. And it was a specific scene where a woman wearing a burqa was sitting in a public park in Budapest. The scene went that some person comes and attacks her for wearing this headscarf. While this scene was filmed, someone really attacked them for wearing this. Now, my point here is not to berate Hungary in general, but I'm saying that that there is a level of hysteria that it's not universal for Hungary. And we know that these things happened around Brexit, for example, or following Brexit, that there were attacks on those people who were different from the idealized image of the normal in the societies. To invoke an old and very famous saying, the specter of populism is reigning over Europe. And we hear it in the media all the time, populism, populism. And I couple this also in relations to Central Europe with the notion of illiberal democracy. Now, to just put some frames on the term populism, that I suppose everyone has a general idea on what it is. Populism relies on identity-based political mobilizations. So they tend to divide the world into us and them. Such divisions are a necessity for populists. They're not a preference, because without this, they would not exist. So identity matters whenever and wherever politicians make a direct appeal to voters, because identity is a big part of what personalizes the relationship between elites and their followers in a populist network. When politicians make a direct and personal relationship with the voters based on some identifiable characteristics, they automatically leave other parts of the electorate out by implication. So for the in-group, the sense of being special or selected becomes an important part of the relationship. For the out-group, the sense of being rejected is hard to forget or to forgive. American-Austrian political scientist Jan Werner Müller says that populists claim that they and they alone represent the people. This claim is not empirical because the people in the populist imagination are not a sociological category, they're a discursive category. And it's always distinctly moral. So ruling parties in Hungary and in Poland, Fidesz and PiS, or Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, Law and Justice, they do not pretend to stand for all the Hungarians and all the Polish people. But they insist that they stand for all the true Hungarians and all the true Poles. So this is the distinction. They transform democracy from an instrument of inclusion, one of the European values that we designated in the beginning, into one of exclusion, thus delegitimizing non-majoritarian institutions, such as parliaments, by casting them as obstacles to the will of the people. So they want to override some of the checks and balances of liberal democracy. Now the term illiberalism. It was coined by American political scientist turned journalist Farid Zakaria some 20 years ago, or a bit more. And according to him, illiberal democracies are increasing around the world and are increasingly limiting the freedoms of the people they represent. So in the West, according to him, electoral democracy and civil liberties, what we mentioned again, speech, religion, etc., they go hand in hand. But around the world, the two are coming apart, democracy and liberalism. So democracy without constitutional liberalism is producing centralized regimes, the erosion of liberty, ethnic competition, conflict, and even war. Going back to Central Europe, this definition by Farid Zakaria was promoted by none other than the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in 2014, who made the concept central to the creation and reinvention of his own party, Fidesz. So he claimed that the party's goal was to create an illiberal state, a non-liberal state that does not reject the fundamental principles of liberalism, such as freedom, and he could list a few more, but it does not make this ideology the central element of state organization. Instead, includes a different, special, national approach. He claimed that this form of illiberal democracy disdained toleration of minorities, believed in strong forms of majoritarianism, rejected checks and balances, and believed in nationalism and separatism. So, according to Freedom House, which evaluates the progress of certain transitional countries, he has like an authoritarian-like hold on Hungary. I believe a quote by Prime Minister Orban would be in order here to explain how he sees this new politics. The Hungarian nation is not simply a group of individuals, but a community that must be organized, reinforced, and in fact, constructed. Today, the stars of international analysis, and here he speaks about economics now, are Singapore, China, India, Turkey, Russia. And I believe that our political community rightly anticipated this challenge. And if we think back on what we did in the last 4 years and what we are going to do in the following years, then it really can't be interpreted from this angle. We are searching for, and we are doing our best to find ways of parting with Western European dogmas, making ourselves independent from them, the form of organizing a community that is capable of making us competitive in this great world race. Speaking later on a commemoration event, maybe Isabella will reflect on this afterwards, he told an adoring crowd that Christian Europe and Hungary were waging a civilizational struggle against the wave of mass migration organized by a network of activists, troublemakers, and NGOs paid by international speculators. And these international speculators is usually George Soros, to whom I will refer in a bit later. So today, these illiberal or popular parties are declaring that they are the only representatives of the so-called real, ordinary people. Based on this majoritarian perception of democracy, they permanently need to find new enemies of the nation, and they can be inside, the national traitors, NGOs, etc., or outside, they can be, for example, Brussels or the migrants. So they stigmatize them and keep the level of continuous political tension at home at a high degree. According to Francis Fukuyama, who was tackling these issues in the past few years, the reasons for the emergence of such nationalist populism are threefold: economic, political, and cultural. So according to him, there are certain winners and losers of globalization, so of the freedom of market movement. And especially in Western societies, the losers are usually declining middle classes and the working classes. And the winners can be seen as the lower paid workers from the lesser developed countries. However, the winners at home are usually those elites that yesterday Abraham was talking about, whom we see as some kind of European elites. And these winners at home, they also dominate the cultural production. So we can see this connection between economic decline, and culture. A second reason for this emergence, according to Fukuyama, are political, and these are that in conditions, as throughout Europe we can see conditions of very polarized electorates without clear majority of parties winning elections, so we end up with weaker liberal institutions. And they produce weak government with checks and balances, something that in the US is called this vetocracy. And people get frustrated and they need someone to get things done, which is someone with a stronger hand. In terms of politics, again, we can see some of these reasons and problems in the ways of functioning of the EU. So when we look at Greece and the financial crackdown in Greece, it has been interpreted that the reason for this is having a monetary union without a fiscal union. In terms of the migration, we see that we had the freedom of movement within Europe with the Schengen, however, inappropriate defense or control of the external borders. So this creates certain frustrations that then get produced, then get translated into preference for certain political decisions and representatives. Final driver of populism, according to Fukuyama, is the cultural, and this has to do with the identity. Samuel Huntington, many years ago, he pointed that the most dangerous socio-economic class was not the poor and the marginalized, who often lacked the time and resources to mobilize, but rather middle classes, whose families felt that they had lost ground economically and were not being adequately recognized by the political systems. So they make economic demands, but they tend to interpret their loss of status culturally as well. So they used to constitute the group that defined national identity, but now they're being displaced by newcomers who are being given, according to them, unfair advantages over them. So they're driven by politics of resentment against elites who benefit from the system, and they tend to scapegoat immigrants and foreigners as agents of this loss of status. And throughout Europe, we can see this not only in Central and Eastern Europe, and we have these various versions of populism, usually left or right-wing populism. So this also distinguishes North European and American populism from that of Southern Europe or Latin America. The social basis of Brexit, Trump, Le Pen voters lies in the declining middle or working classes. Podemos here, Syriza in Greece, or Chavez before in Venezuela, or the Kirchners, they're more traditionally left-wing parties who were representing the poor. So the interpretation of this loss of status can be different. However, in the last couple of years, urbanism, as it has been called, has spread over in the Central European region. So with the usually his best friend, Polish nationalist leader Kaczynski, they have declared this cultural counter-revolution inside the European Union. In order to understand the reasons why this is happening and why this difference between Western Europe and Central or Eastern Europe, we need to go back into the transitions and the revolutions of 1989. According to Ralph Dahrendorf, the victory of 1989 was the victory of open society against the closed society. Now, open society, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, is a very potent marker, very potent signifier, because that is the name of the foundation of George Soros, the main enemy of all these leaders, who borrowed this term from his intellectual guru, Karl Popper. Another historian, Ernest Gellner, was looking at these revolutions and saying that 3 sixes are important for the transformation of these societies, former communist societies. The elections and the rule of law, which will take around 6 months. The institution of market economy, which will take around 6 years. And then civil society, which will take around 60 years. However, going back to one more person that we mentioned yesterday as a par excellence European intellectual, Milan Kundera, 1989 was experienced by its protagonists, so dissidents and all these revolutionaries, as the return of Central Europe and of nations recovering their liberty from the Soviet Empire. So the cultural resilience of Central Europe society has prevailed over a decaying communist structure. If Central Europe's tragedy was, as Kundera wrote, to be a kidnapped West, culturally in the West, but politically in the East and geographically in the center, then the revolutions of 1989 signified the possibility for the countries of this other Europe to finally reconcile their politics with their culture and their geography. So, if history had displaced these nations, in 1989 they went back to their rightful place. And we go back to European identity because in the political imagination of Central Europe at that time, open society and European identity were going hand in hand. So several countries, as I said, now Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Croatia, they have repealed this attitude. I got 20 minutes. Okay. So some of the most burning problems that these countries are facing now are the rule of law, the recourse to nationalism, and the cultural wars. So the rule in terms of rule of law, as we heard in the European Parliament, these governments have worked against the separation of powers, the media independence, political neutrality of the civil service, fighting against civil society organizations and academia. If you're familiar, for example, with the problems that the Central European universities facing in Budapest. And according to Viktor Orban, liberal democracy is just one of the options, but an option that cannot protect national interests. Now, political reasons, when Donald Trump was elected, this was a sort of confirmation of this approach or of the success of this approach. So the Prime Minister Orban said, liberal non-democracy is over, what a day. The second aspect of democratic regression concerns the resurgence of nationalism in countries which, unlike those in the Balkans, had avoided allowing a return of nationalist sentiment right after 1989. However, in the course of the last decade, the mantle of legitimacy has passed from technocratic liberalism, as was promoted in those days, to an organic conception of the nation as a historic, cultural, and religious community that the state must protect. Another very fine quote from Orban. I've been going to Brussels regularly for 11 years. The European elites, the political decision makers, and the people who run the media imagine that human development moves forward via the liquidation of our identities. It's not modern to be Polish, Czech, or Hungarian. It is not modern to be Christian. Instead, a new identity has appeared in their place, that of the European. And the British have said no. They have decided to remain British. The identity of the European does not exist. There are Poles, there are Hungarians. All these phenomena observed today in Europe show that a cultural counter-revolution is possible. And as we can see, there have been reinforcements from the West. The victory of Trump and the Brexit were this legitimation of a cultural counter-revolution. So along with Central Europe, they are this avant-garde of the anti-liberal movement. Speaking of nationalism and this comparison between how Central Europe and Western Europe are looking, we can see, for example, German democracy, because there the democracy in Germany rests on the assumption that nationalism inevitably leads to Nazism. The transnational EU originated as part of the geopolitical strategy to block a potentially dangerous reassertion of German sovereignty by integrating the country economically into the rest of Europe and by giving a federal republic a post-national identity. However, Central and Eastern Europeans, they find it difficult to share such a negative view of nationalism. First, because their states are the children of the age of nationalism when they were liberated from big multinational empires, such as the Habsburg Empire, the Prussian, etc. The second, because nationalism played an important and essential role in the mostly non-violent anti-communist revolutions in 1989. According to Jacques Rupnik, a Czech-French political scientist, the culture wars are the third part of this anti-liberal turn in Central Europe. Political polarization is not only internal, it also has an external dimension where one can hear echoes of Putin's contempt for a decadent, permissive Europe and Donald Trump's praise when he went to Warsaw last year, and he said that Poland is fighting for family, for freedom, for country, and for God. So he praised such politics. Another important or very interesting a quote comes from the former Polish Prime Minister Witold Waszczykowski, who said that in 2016, the government's task was to cure our state of some diseases spread by hostile media organs, convinced that the direction of history is necessarily leading to a mix of cultures and races, a world of cyclists and vegetarians who rely solely on renewable energies and fight against every symbol of religion. So these pathologies, according to him, were incompatible with the Polish values, European values, Polish values, shared by the majority of population in Poland, because they look to tradition, historical consciousness, patriotism, faith in God, a normal family life between a man and a woman. So, in conclusion for this section, again, a quote from Orban. 27 years ago, here in Central Europe, we believed that Europe was our future. Today, we feel that we are the future of Europe. Another important aspect of the 1989 is that these were colorless revolutions, in the sense they didn't bring new ideas. It was only to catch up to normality, to the mainstream of Western European modernity. So Western Europe had this normality, Eastern Europe wanted this normality. And this, according to Bulgarian political scientist Ivan Krastev, legitimized the politics of imitation, which produced certain frustrations. So before, during the Cold War, we had communists on one side, Democrats on the other side. During the transitions, we had the imitators on one side and the imitated on the other. And this process had many different names, we all know them. democratization, liberalization, enlargement, convergence, integration, Europeanization. But the goal pursued by this post-communist elite was simple. They wished their countries to become normal, which meant like the West. They wished their countries, this involved importing liberal democratic institutions, applying Western political and economic recipes, and publicly endorsing Western values. So imitation was widely understood to be the shortest ways to freedom and prosperity. According to Krastev, and here he enters psychology, the imitator's life inescapably produces feelings of inadequacy, inferiority, dependency, lost identity, and involuntary insincerity. Indeed, the futile struggle to create a truly credible copy of an idealized model involves a never-ending torment of self-criticism, if not self-contempt. What makes imitation so irksome is not only the implicit assumption that the mimic is somehow morally and humanly inferior to the model. It also entails the assumption that Central and Eastern Europe's copycat nations accept the West's right to evaluate their success or failure at living up to Western standards. In this sense, imitation comes to feel like a loss of sovereignty. And we see that afterwards also in Western Europe when we say that we need more sovereignty from the European Union. So the origins of this current illiberalism in the center are emotional and pre-ideological, rooted in the rebellion at the humiliations that must necessarily accompany a project requiring acknowledgement of a foreign culture as superior to one's own. Going back to nationalism, when Poland's Kaczynski accuses liberalism of being against the very notion of the nation, and when Orban's lieutenant Maria Schmidt says, "We are Hungarians and we want to preserve our culture," their overheated nativism embodies a refusal to be judged by foreigners according to foreign standards. So sort of taking our country back. The migration is obviously the most burning issue here. And when we speak about the imitation and the imitated and the relation between what is normal and what is not, we must understand this position of the four Visegrad countries to the policy of the EU and of Germany in particular regarding the migrant wave of 2015. So it basically put an emphasis on the different approaches between the two Europes, so to say. So the political leaders in Central Europe are on guard against the dangers that the migratory influx poses for the security and identity of the nation and of Europe. So those who govern in other parts of Europe, such as Angela Merkel, advocated the admission of migrants without limit in the name of European values. So we're going back to European values and how from Central Europe you're looking at what someone imposes on you as European values, which is to be open. So in the eyes of Angela Merkel, that this stemmed from the universality of human rights. And we mentioned in the beginning that we think that those are universal values for the European values. So they see the Central European countries perceive this redistribution of migrants across national borders according to quotas as an attempt to impose on them a multicultural model of society that they consider a failure. We can observe in these countries the return in a new form of discourse about defending national culture and European civilization. Today against Islamism from the south, as yesterday it was against Sovietism coming from the east. So immigration is the leitmotif of Orban's discourse. They pose the threat, they're the great enemy. They're not gypsies or Jews like they used to be, but they're migrants are who destroyed our culture. Hungary protects the whole of Europe from migrants. It protects Christianity from migrants and Islam, and Hungary protects Hungarian women from rape by migrants. This has been coupled by those who usually work to protect and help the migrants, and that is the civil society. So according to philosopher Agnes Heller, this fight between Viktor Orban and George Soros is along the same lines between Erdogan and Fethullah Gulen. According to this predominant discourse in Hungary, it's George Soros who organizes the immigration, organizes everything against Hungary. There are many things that make him appropriate for that. He was born in Hungary, but he is an American millionaire, and he is a Jew. All these things together make him a wonderful target for hatred, and if there is any anti-Semitism at all, it can be channeled only against Soros, so we don't have to attack all of the Jews. He is the typical Jew and the head of global conspiracy. He dictates everything to the European Union. Donald Tusk is just a servant of Soros. Final reason, okay, I'm good with time. The final reason for the emergence of this nationalist populism that I would like to mention is this out-migration from the region of Central Europe. So today, this region is made up of small, aging, ethnically homogeneous societies. For example, only 1.6% of those living in Poland were born outside of the country. Only 0.1% are Muslim. In fact, cultural and ethnic diversity rather than wealth is the primary difference between Eastern and Western Europe today. If we compare Austria and Hungary to neighboring countries, similar size and once unified under the Habsburg Empire, foreign citizens make up a little under 2% of the Hungarian population, and most of them are ethnic Hungarians from Romania. In Austria, they make up 15%. So in the Eastern European political imagination, cultural and ethnic diversity are seen as an existential threat, and opposition to this threat forms the core of the new illiberalism. So for many liberal-minded Eastern Europeans, when the borders were open in 1989, a mistrust of nationalist loyalties and the prospects of joining the modern world made the emigration the only logical and legitimate choice. So, as a result, in 1989, the revolutions had this perverse effect of accelerating population decline in the newly liberated countries. From 1989 till 2017, Latvia lost 27% of its population, Lithuania 23%, Bulgaria 21%. Hungary lost nearly 3% of its population in the last 10 years. In 2016, around 1 million Poles were living in the United Kingdom alone. So this emigration of the young and talented was occurring in countries that already had aging populations and low birth rates. Together, these trends set the stage for a demographic panic. So you can imagine, you cannot change your government, but you can change freely your country. So this is the choosing of the exit instead of voice. Thus, according to Ivan Krastev, the best explanation for the rise of populism is the emigration and the fear of immigration. So the success of national populism, which feeds off a sense that the country's identity is under threat, is the outcome of the mass exodus of young people from the region, combined with the prospect of large-scale immigration, which together set demographic alarm bells ringing. Moving to the West used to be equivalent to rising in social status. And as a result, those who stayed started feeling like losers who had been left behind. Going back to normal and what is normal. Because they were saying that in 1989 we want to be normal because we are living in unnormal societies. So this elevation of Western normality as the principal goal of political revolutions had two perverse effects. It dramatically raised the question of how to reconcile normal in the sense of what is widespread in one's country, right? That is the definition of normal. But in the sense of something that the West somehow is and the East is not. So we want to be normal, which means we want to be like the West, which means we want to be European, which means we need to accept European values. In it, this sense of normality is what actually made many of the young East and Central Europeans to move really quickly. However, when we compare communism and liberalism during the Cold War, you had communism, actually this society, the idealized society, was not there. We imagined it, but it was not there. We were working towards it, supposedly. However, liberalism was just across the border. We were seeing it all the time. However, if you recall, or some of us recall what was Europe or Western Europe 27, 30 years ago and what is it now, we can see that it's completely different also. So the ideal of what is normal changed. So this disturbing effect of an elusively changing normality is best illustrated by the way Central and Eastern Europeans have reacted to changing cultural norms in Western societies over the last 2 decades. In the eyes of conservative Poles in the days of the Cold War, Western societies were normal because, unlike godless communist systems, they cherished tradition and believed in God. Then suddenly, Poles discovered that Western normality means secularism, multiculturalism, and gay marriage. So should we be surprised that Poles and their neighbors felt cheated when they found out that the society they wanted to imitate had disappeared? It washed away by the swift currents of modernization. So if in the immediate aftermath of '89, normality was understood largely in political terms, free elections, separation of powers, private property, right to travel, during the last decade, normality has increasingly come to be interpreted only in cultural terms, identity politics. So as a result, Central and Eastern Europeans are becoming mistrustful and resentful of norms coming from the West. Ironically, Eastern Europe is now starting to view itself as the last bastion of genuine European values. In order to reconcile the idea of normal, meaning what is widespread at home, with what is normatively obligatory in the countries they aim to imitate, East Europeans or Central Europeans, consciously or unconsciously, have begun to normalize the model countries, arguing that what is widespread in the East is also prevalent in the West, but Westerners are hypocritically pretending that their societies are different. So Eastern Europeans often relive their normative dissonance, saying between paying bribes to survive in the East and fighting corruption to be accepted in the West, by concluding that the West is really just as corrupt as the East, but Westerners are simply in denial and hiding the truth. 2.5 minutes. Okay. We are finished. I will finish now with this sense of the reverse imitation. So today, Europe is haunted by the specter of reverse imitation. The players in the post-'89 imitation game are, at least in some respect, changing places. In a few cases, the mimics have become the model and vice versa, especially if we look at the radical right-wing populists in Western Europe. So the ultimate revenge of the Central and Eastern European populists against Western liberalism is not merely to reject the imitation imperative, but to invert it. So we are the real Europeans, as the Orbáns and the Kaczynskis claim, and if the West wants to save itself, it will have to imitate the East. As Orbán revealingly declared in a speech in July last year, 27 years ago, here in Central Europe, we believed that Europe was our future. Today, we feel that we are the future of Europe. Okay, thank you.
So, thank you very much, Dimitar. It was a very, very interesting presentation, indeed, with many topics that, as I say at the beginning when the presentation, are very hot today, nowadays, especially in this area in Europe. And you develop a very interesting issue on the imitation and the feelings towards imitations, which takes me to the perceptions of the things and maybe the way we saw Europe to those countries that joined in the last decade, and if they were really ready, trying to be a little bit provocative, to become members of the European Union. There has been all this discussion about what happened in 2004 when all these countries joined in the European Union. And because it was a little bit forced, well, my theory is that the more Europe, the better, that it will be always like that. Of course, countries have to accomplish certain criteria. But I want to put a question. Well, two questions I have here when listening to you. One is related with the conversation I had with Abraham de Swan. You know, he's a sociologist when I was coming here with him this morning. Because we were discussing about how things happen suddenly. I mean, bad things like this kind of movements that break down the democracy and the countries, or a civil war, or things like that. They can suddenly, but there is a lot of signs before that we don't see, or we don't want to see. And he was explaining me an anecdotic thing about someone in his family before the World War, and how politicians didn't escape from what was about to happen with the Jewish people. And people in the street knew about that and escaped. And it happened in his family. He has an uncle who was a politician, and he has a cousin who was someone in the street. So the normal citizen, let's say, was able to see all these signs, and he was able to organize his escape with his family. But the politicians who were in the power were not able to see all those signs about what was about to happen. And it happened. They could not avoid that. And once it happened, it happened. You cannot stop it. So it's something terrible. And I was quite surprised about that. And especially nowadays, for me, these are signs. Everything is happening. These are signs about something bigger that could happen if we don't stop them. We'll be able to stop all these things. I mean, are they there to stay, in your opinion, especially in those countries where they take this like a flag, and as you say, they are now thinking that they are the model to follow? This is something that worries to me, really. And the second question, which is related with that, it is really the feeling in the street, or is just because you make a research maybe on political discourse, on what is on the newspapers and so on, but it is really the street, the feeling in the street, or it is just the political feeling and what the newspaper wants to sell? And of course, when you are giving gas to this, you are provoking more and more populism at the end. I think the media has an important role to play here, and I don't think they are doing the right thing right now. So these are my two questions. Well, it's just the political feeling of the movement they want to really follow, and the street, normal citizens, to say so, civil society doesn't agree at all, or is really, which will be more worrying for me, is the real feeling of the whole country.
Yeah, sure.
Or do you prefer to answer in the micro, in this one, and stay there?
No, I will answer here. Just let me get some water. Just a disclaimer that these were mostly not my original thought, but I was just, as I was referencing, it was a bit of a literature overview of on what is being discussed on this issue in academia at the moment. But I actually have a feeling that is genuine in Central Europe now. It's not only what is being presented through the discourse, because they win elections. And both Orban and Kaczynski have spent before, and I will even, if I go down to Serbia or to Bulgaria, so not necessarily European Union countries, they have spent a lot of time with the masses, going in every village. And the backbone of this is the rural citizens. So they maybe don't have so much support in big metropolitan centers of their countries, but definitely the majority of voters from the rural citizens and those who see themselves as losers of the transition, they do support such policies. So I'm not so enthusiastic and so optimistic when it comes to this issue. Now, the second question was, like, is it a sign of something bigger and here to stay? When I was interested in this also, and I should have reflected it in my speech, but when these countries were interested in, as Kasta says, this imitation, and when they were really following through until they entered the European Union, they had some kind of, liberalism had some kind of superpowers backing it. It has a much stronger EU than it is today, or at least more compact, and a much stronger US to protect liberalism. However, we see the rise of non-liberal powers from the East who are overriding the economic power, especially of the EU and the US. So you don't have this big brother guarantee. And that is why, like for example, another Bulgarian author, Venelingiana, says this or other authors as well, post-accession malaise or fatigue. Mm-hmm. They were being strict, they were really working towards it, but when they entered, they got relaxed and they knew that they can keep into power by following through with more of this nationalist politics. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the floor? It's an interesting topic, maybe very early to talk about this, but I think it's important. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I told you that there will be an award to that people who will make more questions.
Sorry. So, yeah, it's a very...
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so it's a very pessimistic point of view. So the thing is, what can we do to fight against? They are very young people. How can they do to fight against all this populism and from their power?
Well, I'm going to sound idealistic, I will say, with more education and really more involvement of civil society, first of all. But I think that the European Union should also kind of reconsider its approach to these countries and to countries from the Eastern Partnership, especially, and to sort of negotiate more and have a more understanding of Russian politics towards its immediate neighbors. But that's not really an answer, and I wasn't even trying to give answers in my speech. I was just pointing out to the problems, and especially I wanted to give an understanding why this is happening, instead of just attack Central Europe. Yeah, well,
that is important. That is why we are here, and I wonder if we will be able to do something to stop this. This is also a question we are having recently. Now that the European elections are coming. Mm-hmm. For instance, a long time ago, I say that the end of Europe will be because of democracy. So democracy will kill democracy, as we know it right now. And maybe the debate is also a little bit if we should allow that certain people that doesn't respect European values is represented in the European Parliament, in the European Council, and they have the power to influence Europe against Europe, which for me is a kind of, doesn't make sense at all. Any more questions over there? So 2 questions. Do you want to take 2 questions at a time, or it's okay?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask if you think that Hungary is going to make a referendum like Brexit, or they are just criticizing European Union, but they actually don't want to go out because they know the consequences.
And the other?
Mine is not the question. I just wanted to say that this topic is really linked with the conference of yesterday of the leadership. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should pay attention to the mass who is voting the leader. And also I think we should prevent informing the people, because there is a huge lack of knowledge from this kind of people who vote the nationalism. And I think Europe is integrity and inclusion, and not only from the Europeans, but also from the migrants who are coming. So maybe integrated them and making them aware that these people is not what they expect to be.
Thanks. Okay, I will answer this question about the who exit. Hexit. Yeah, I don't think is going to happen. Still, when you look at the polls, Central Europeans are amongst the most enthusiastic citizens about European Union, and they are above the EU average about having positive attitudes towards the EU itself. And plus, it really benefits economically from the structural funds. So I don't see it happening, and I don't think that any political leader would dare to even push for a referendum to exit. Okay.
Okay, 30 seconds, last question. Oh, 3 hands. Okay, we'll take these 2 ones, and we can add 3 minutes to the thing. Please go ahead. You present yourself and.
Well, first, thanks. I wanted to ask you something in relation to what you answered to her when she asked about how to solve this, maybe. And I wanted to ask if you think that the economical problem may have something to see, because I think that this populist maybe arises because of the economical background in a world that is even that every moment is like the inequality is bigger. So if you think that it is related, it's like a key way to solve this, maybe.
Okay, and the last one over there, and a little comment from Linda here.
My name is Junior. I would like to ask what the consequence has the ways of nationalism about the value of the Union European, and also about the immigrant, the value of the open Europe to the immigrant, what the consequences about the rise up of the nationalism that during this period we see the nationalism is one part of the people that rise up, what the consequences has at the value of Union Europea.
Okay, and last comment from Linda.
Yeah. If democracy will kill democracy, which kind of leader do we need for the future? Maybe Jan can answer another time, but I think that's very important. It's a very good question, I think. If you use the habit of democracy, can we survive not only in Central Europe, but I think as well in Western Europe, where you see the same things happening? Maybe now on a different scale, but it's happening everywhere, step by step. What can we do as citizens and as leaders to protect our Europe or our world?
So thank you very much. I don't know if you can answer all of them, but maybe you can comment on that.
Sure, about the economic problems and the inequality, as I mentioned shortly in my presentation, yes, this is one of the explanatory factors, but it's not the only one, because in societies that have been well off, for example, Poland has been an economic leader of the region, and also in the Czech Republic, they elected a populist president, but they have not suffered from immigration, and they have not suffered significantly from unemployment. So it's definitely not the only explanation. But personally, as a leftist, I would like to say that more solidarity and reducing economic inequality can help solve these problems, definitely. Now, the consequences of nationalism for racism in Western Europe or in more well, we can see, and I kind of reflected a little bit, that the success of Brexit and the success of Trump are giving legitimation for this politics here. So at this moment, we are seeing a momentum of mutual reinforcement. So I think that we are going to have at least a short period of time when when these forces will become stronger. But I think that the openness of Europe will prevail, basically. Yeah. And about, I have no answer for that.
You want to make maybe a quick answer from Jan?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you always get the leader you deserve. So people elect what they need. So I think it's always two-way street. We have to change the opinion of the people. According to immigrants, looking from the economic perspective, in our country, all business people believe we need the immigrants. We need them because we are overaged and we are really short of people. Even during the crisis, unemployment was extremely low. So we need them, and therefore I think it's less harsh in our countries.
Quick.
Communication is the key. We have to communicate that to the people because they don't know. They think, oh, they're scared of immigration. So it's a good campaign.
Okay, so I think it was very interesting way of starting the morning. Hot topics, a lot of challenges, many doubts, maybe some ideas for solution. Asking you to be more active. That is very important too. And that's it for the moment because we'll come back to you after the coffee break. So a big clap to Dimitar and thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.